Hey everyone, welcome to the first video in a 3-video series on the Axie economy. In today's video, I'll be covering SLP tokenomics. In the next video, I'll be covering AXS tokenomics, and in the last video, I'll be wrapping it up and covering how the general economy works. If you haven't watched my previous video on what are NFT games and what are play-to-earn games, I'd highly recommend you check that out before you watch this video. Because of the fact that Axie Infinity is both a NFT and play-to-earn game, watching that video will help you understand the basics of what I'm talking about here. So that brings me to the main topic of today's video. What is SLP? SLP is an acronym for Smooth Love Potions. It's an ERC20 token, which means it's a blockchain-based asset on the Ethereum network that has value and can be sent or received. That's a really fancy way to say it is indeed a digital currency, and it's the main in-game currency used within Axie Infinity. And it has an uncapped supply. That means the amount of SLP that exists changes over time, so SLP can be created or destroyed, and I'll get into that in a little bit. So now that we understand at a very high level what SLP is, it's the main in-game currency of Axie Infinity. It has no utility outside of the game. I want to go over how it works within the ecosystem and what drives its price over time. So within your typical Axie account, you would have 4 things that you could own or be in possession of. The first is your digital asset or your NFT, and those are called Axies. Axies are the characters in the game, and without Axies, you can't actually play the game in player versus player or player versus environment mode. The second thing that you could have in your Axie account is SLP, and as we mentioned, that's the main in-game currency of Axie Infinity. So in-game currency number 1. The third thing you can have within your account is AXS. That is technically another digital currency within the Axie ecosystem, but it's not the main in-game currency used within Axie Infinity, and I'll discuss that in a little more detail in a bit. And the last thing you would typically have within your account is Ethereum, which is a cryptocurrency on the Ethereum network, and you use Ethereum to buy or sell Axies. Within the Axie ecosystem, there are a few things you could do with the 4 items within your Axie account, and I want to quickly go over those things. The first thing you could do within the game is actually to use your Axies to battle. So when you battle or play the game, you use your Axies, and when you play the game, in return, you earn SLP. Right now, that's the main way to earn SLP, is to actually play the game in player versus player or player versus environment modes. The next large activity within Axie Infinity in the ecosystem is breeding or creating new Axies. When you create new Axies, you are spending SLP and you're spending AXS, and in return, you're getting new Axies or digital assets that can be used within the game to then earn more SLP. Right now, this is the only utility or way to burn or decrease the supply of SLP. As you can see here, you spend SLP and AXS to breed, and in return, you get new Axies or digital assets or NFTs. You can use those Axies within the game to then earn more SLP. So you can see this creates a little loop within Axie Infinity for SLP being earned and spent. The next main item of the Axie Infinity ecosystem, and it's not as important because it doesn't utilize SLP, I just wanted to quickly go over it, is the Axie Marketplace. So within the Axie Infinity Marketplace, players actually interact with each other to buy and sell their digital assets. So you can see here, I wrote you would get ETH if you sell your Axie, and then if you spend ETH, you get an Axie. And it's important to note that the Axie Marketplace is peer-to-peer, and the Sky Mavis team actually makes money within Axie Infinity by taking a cut of each transaction that happens within the marketplace. They take a 4.25% cut, and that's the only way the Sky Mavis team actually earn money through the ecosystem of Axie Infinity right now. So at a very high level, this is the Axie Infinity ecosystem and how the economy works. There are very limited use cases of SLP within the game. You can only earn or create SLP when you play the game in player versus player modes, and you can only spend SLP or destroy SLP when you want to create new Axies by breeding. So although this is how the economy works right now, and this is how SLP works right now, I fully believe that this will change in the future, and more than likely I'll have to create a new video with updated SLP tokenomics because there'll be more ways to earn and spend SLP within the game. So with that being said, I want to go into SLP supply and demand. If we understand those 2 things, we can understand what affects SLP prices and why they affect SLP prices. We could mint, create, or increase the supply of SLP by playing the game, and we could burn, destroy, or decrease the supply of SLP by breeding, which creates new Axies. Because the main and only use case of SLP is to create new Axies, the SLP demand is directly correlated to the amount of demand there is for breeding. And that can be either from new players entering the ecosystem or existing players within the ecosystem who want to buy SLP to then breed. So to help us understand the price and quantity of SLP a little better, I'm going to draw the supply and demand curve of SLP. So on the y-axis, we would have the price of SLP. And on the x-axis, we would have the quantity of SLP. So to understand why the supply of SLP is upward sloping, think of it from the perspective of a player of the game within Axie Infinity. If you have Axies and you're playing the game, you are more likely to want to supply or create SLP when the price of SLP is higher. So that's why it's upward sloping. So think of it like this. When the price of SLP is up here and it's high, you're more willing to play the game and earn SLP. So you see the price is up here and the quantity of SLP is way up here. That's because when the prices are higher, you want to play the game. Inversely, when the price of SLP is lower, you're less likely to want to play the game. You're less likely to want to earn the SLP because the price of SLP isn't as high. You can't sell it for as much. So when the price of SLP is down here, it intersects at a very low quantity of SLP. So the demand of SLP is actually downward sloping. Think of this as the prospective buyer who wants to buy SLP from the market to then go breed Axies. When the price of SLP is higher, it intersects with the demand curve up here. And that is because the quantity demanded of SLP is lower. If you were a buyer of SLP and the price of SLP is higher, you wouldn't want to purchase as much SLP because it's more expensive. Therefore, the quantity demanded of SLP is down here. Inversely, when the price of SLP is low and you're a buyer of SLP, you're more than likely going to buy more of it, right? Because the price is low, therefore it intersects the demand curve of SLP at a much higher quantity. So it intersects here. So the quantity demanded is higher. Think of this like real life. When something is more expensive, you're less likely to buy it. Therefore, the quantity demanded is lower. However, when something is cheaper, you'll buy more of it. Therefore, when the price is down here, the quantity demanded is up here. So that at a very basic level is why the supply curve is upward sloping and the demand curve is downward sloping. And that's the case here for SLP too. So the point at which the demand curve of SLP and the supply curve of SLP meet is called the equilibrium point, and that is what the SLP price at any given day should be. And this should also help us determine the quantity of SLP in the market at any given day. So let me give you an example as to why when these two curves meet, it's actually the equilibrium price of what we see in the market today. If SLP prices, for example, were set down here, it intersects the supply of SLP and the demand of SLP at two different points. The price of SLP at P2 intersects the supply curve down here. That means the amount of SLP supplied is this point. And the price of SLP down here intersects the demand curve over here. So this is the amount of SLP demanded. So the amount of SLP demanded is quite high because the prices are low over here, but the amount of SLP suppliers are willing to provide is low because the price of SLP is low. Therefore, in this case, there's actually a shortage of SLP within the market. This area here would be a shortage of SLP because there is more SLP being demanded than there is SLP in the market. Therefore, the price of SLP is not at equilibrium. Because there is a shortage of SLP, more suppliers will begin to produce SLP, and the demand of SLP will begin to decrease, and it'll eventually reach the equilibrium point, where the amount of SLP demanded and the amount of SLP in the market supplied is exactly the same. So we know whatever point the supply and demand curve meet is the equilibrium price of the market. However, what if we were to see a shift within the supply of SLP or demand of SLP? So let me run those examples for you. So the demand of SLP is directly correlated to demand of breeding because it's the only use case of SLP. People would only want SLP when they need to breed, and they only need to breed when they want to produce new Axies. and new Axies are needed typically when new players enter the ecosystem or when existing players want new Axies. So let's say there's a large increase in the amount of players coming into Axie, or breeders are anticipating a large increase in the amount of new players. The demand of SLP would increase in that case. In this case, the chart would move to the right. You can see when demand of SLP increases, the line moves to the right. The price of SLP would increase in the quantity of SLP because the suppliers are now supplying more SLP in anticipation of the demand is actually higher as well. When players play the game, more SLP is created. So what happens? The supply curve of SLP is shifted to the right. And the new equilibrium point is down here. That means the amount of SLP in existence is higher. And because there is more supply of SLP, the price of SLP actually decreases. So as players earn SLP, the price of SLP decreases and the quantity of SLP increases. When players burn or destroy or use SLP to breed, it actually decreases the supply of SLP, so it shifts it the opposite direction. You can see when SLP is burned, the price of SLP increases and the quantity of SLP decreases from the original equilibrium. As we know, the supply of SLP is uncapped, so it can fluctuate over time. It can either be burned or minted. And Axie World actually puts out this great data set that shows us the amount of SLP burned and minted per day. You can see the orange color is burned and the pinkish color is minted. So right now the amount of SLP that is being minted is much higher than the amount of SLP that's being burned. Therefore, the supply of SLP is increasing. A common complaint I see about Axie Infinity is that there's not enough burn mechanisms within the game that's causing SLP prices to decline. So what does this mean visually? This means that the supply of SLP is constantly increasing. Therefore, the price is decreasing and the quantity is increasing. But because there's not enough burn mechanisms, the graph of SLP is not moving back this way. It's constantly being pushed to the right and right, which is driving SLP prices lower and lower and the quantity of SLP higher and higher. So how can the Axie Infinity team make sure that the prices of SLP don't get too depressed over time? Well, right now there are two main ways, as you can see from the graph. Either they could add more ways to burn or decrease the supply of SLP, so it shifts it back to the left. Or the second main factor is the demand of SLP increases. If the demand of SLP were to increase, this graph then shifts to the right. That would represent an increase. And here is our new demand graph, D1. And you can see the new equilibrium is now being pushed up this line up to here. So from the original point, players play the game, the supply of SLP increases, so you have a new equilibrium here, the original demand curve and the new supply curve. However, there's an increase in demand of SLP, therefore you move the demand curve to the right and it reaches a new equilibrium point of this. So you can see from the original point, the price of SLP is normally the same, but the quantity of SLP in the market is bigger. The price of SLP stays the same because you had both factors being affected, an increase of SLP and an increase of demand of SLP. So in the end, quantity of SLP is the only thing affected. And that's actually good for the long-term sustainability of the Axie ecosystem. We need to make sure there's enough liquidity and enough SLP, so when you want to buy or sell SLP, that SLP is available for you. While I was filming this video, the Axie Infinity team actually published an announcement saying that they've increased the breeding cost of SLP for Axies. That means on this graph that more SLP would be burned when people breed. That means it would further push back this graph every time someone wants to breed new Axies. I do want to highlight one really interesting part from the article that they published. They were talking about the growth projections of 2022 and how it will require millions of new Axies. They're saying that if we don't have enough SLP to meet this upcoming surge of demand, we will have a situation where the price of SLP surges very high initially to meet the demand, but then crashes back down as growth normalizes and more SLP is created by players. So what does this mean? So in this scenario, the demand of SLP would increase and there would be a large spike. So I'll move this up right here. So the demand would then be up here. And you can see the new equilibrium price would be much higher. And then as players create more SLP and the growth normalizes, the supply of SLP would actually move this way, and the new SLP chart would be here, and then you'd actually have demand decreasing again. So you'd have the equilibrium price here. However, then demand would normalize and it would move this way, and you would actually have a new equilibrium price here. So it would actually cause the SLP prices to be depressed depending on the movements of the supply and demand. So I think one of the things that the Axie Infinity team was trying to say here is that if demand of SLP were to spike, yes, the price of SLP would temporarily increase. However, it would then decrease because both the supply of SLP would increase and the demand of SLP would decrease back to a normalized rate. Ideally, for the Axie Infinity team in the economy, the demand for SLP does not increase suddenly. Rather, it looks like this. So the demand of SLP would increase slowly. It would create a new equilibrium up here. And at the same time that demand of SLP increases, to meet this new demand, the supply of SLP would also increase. It would increase in lockstep of the demand increases. The new equilibrium would end up here. The price of SLP has actually remained somewhat stable. However, the quantity of SLP has now increased. When the demand of SLP increases at the same rate supply of SLP increases, the price of SLP remains stable, the quantity of SLP increases, and it works out for everyone. New players are able to enter the game, and the suppliers of SLP are able to sell their SLP at a stable price. So this is really important to the Axie Infinity ecosystem because Axie Infinity experiences these really high, intense growth spurts all of a sudden. The price of SLP gets spiked up, and a lot of players and users have unrealistic expectations of what the price of SLP should be. These momentary spikes in price is from a demand shock that's caused from SLP and not enough quantity of SLP in the market. Ideally, as I mentioned, the demand of SLP would be slow and continual, and at the same time, the supply of SLP would increase, causing the price of SLP to remain stable while the quantity of SLP increases. As I've gone over before, the tokenomics of SLP are actually quite simple because of the limited use cases of SLP. You can only earn them in the game, and you can only use them to breed. In the future, I would expect the Axie team to expand on this idea. Because we are still in the alpha or beta stages of the game, we still don't know some of the use cases that SLP could be used for. I know a lot of people have speculated on ideas and what they hope SLP could be used for, but until we see land gameplay or the next iteration of the game, the supply and demand of SLP is primarily driven by breeding and new players entering the ecosystem. By adding additional utility and burning mechanisms and ways to use SLP or create SLP, it also affects the demand of SLP. Ideally, we would get to the point where the demand of SLP isn't purely driven by new player growth and creating new Axies. But I think the Sky Mavs team is acutely aware of this fact, and once more parts of the game starts to be released, such as the land and Battle V2, I fully believe that there'll be more ways within the game to utilize SLP, and this will help make it a more sustainable token. Thank you very much for watching this video. I hope you learned something about SLP tokenomics. Thanks for watching. Bye.